welcome everybody. This is a wonderful day because I get to hear, as do you, three wonderful chief residents who sadly for me, it's bittersweet, are saying goodbye. And the purpose of these grand rounds when they were conceived 20 years ago were in part to entertain the residents that they leave behind and give them advice and insight into excelling during the 7 years you're a neurological surgery resident. And they have been memorable beyond belief. Some of the lines that have come up during this and some of the insights belong in a museum because they are so they're so good, they're so insightful, they're so wise. These three residents are wise beyond their years. And I'll tell you, the first resident we're going to introduce everybody. I mean, it's hard to introduce residents that have spent 7 years, and I mean 7 years of 24/7 at the University of Washington. Ariana came to us, we were just talking before, as a sub-I, and I couldn't remember what month, if it was August or September, and she corrected me. I thought it was August or September, and there were several University of Pennsylvania medical students, and she just excelled. She got attracted to the global health part of our university. She came to us from the twin countries of Trinidad and Tobago via Canada, and she went to Johns Hopkins where she got her degree in biology, then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, did great things at the University of Pennsylvania, worked in a lab of one of our former graduates as well, and really excelled. And Ariana, for those that don't know, is going up to a much coveted fellowship at the University of Alabama in pediatric neurosurgery. And she is just one of those positive people that light up the room every time she is in the room. She's eternally optimistic, a positive force in our department. And one of the beautiful things that I remember about her, and you'll hear about this again, is when we lost a couple of people to COVID because of exposure, and we were left with a hole at Children's Hospital, you know, I was expecting a third or fourth year resident to come forward, but instead the 7th year resident said, no problem, I'll take call as a junior resident and I'll do it. So that's the sort of human being that Ariana is. And so Ariana, why don't you entertain us and tell us a little bit about your perspective of survivor residency. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barkley, for being so and for everything over the last 7 years. I can't everything that you've done.
Can everybody mute themselves, please? Thank you.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Looks
okay.
Good.
Right. So the truth of the matter is that I had a very difficult time with putting this talk together, mainly because from knowing you, my fellow residents, I know that you have the tools to succeed already, to not just make it through, and with that, and have probably already heard the usual messages around like organization and observation and the 3 A's of being affable, available, able, and the like. When I polled some colleagues and friends, there were multiple suggestions, some hilarious, but I was promptly told by a trusted friend that a belly aching, like laugh out loud presentation would be a surprise coming from me. Thank you very much for that. And ultimately, the majority ruled I should just speak from the heart. So bear with me as I fulfill my role as the touchy-feely one of the 3 of us. So I remember when I was applying, talking to one of the pediatric neurosurgeons at Penn, who very astutely looked at the applicants and said, one day, likely into your second year, you'll look back on this application time and realize you wanted this. You begged for this. You paid money for this experience right now. And I will plead the fifth as to whether, aside from this very moment, I thought back to that memory. But I start off with that because I want you to know that reflecting from this side of the journey, I'm not going to sugarcoat the evolution. It is challenging. You aren't alone in feeling triumphant at times, nor like a failure at times. So just know that when you stumble, as everyone inevitably does at some point, that you're not the only one who has done so, and unfortunately, likely will not be the last. I used to look at these talks as inspiration to keep going, to keep improving, to keep evolving as a surgeon and a person, and hopefully for those imperfect beings that dare enter this really special vocation, that this can provide some semblance of encouragement in those moments that you question your life decisions. Just wanted to pay homage to Bales for those of you guys who know him. This was my intro to the OR as an intern with him dancing as he was doing a tumor resection as a 3. But so I just wanted to say what we do is absolutely amazing. When you sit down to actually reflect, like we have the privilege of being of service in a very unique way, to study and intervene on an organ that can in turn study and intervene on itself, to be entrusted into the inner circle of patients and families during their most difficult times. It's easy on the day-to-day, especially when you're sleep deprived, pulled in a multitude of directions, to forget how truly special. It's also easy to forget that the line we established by labeling one doctor and the other patient is an artificial one. My first experience in medicine was as a family member. My little sister was admitted to Mass General in a ketoacidotic coma when she was first diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. And I still remember our frantic drive through Boston, trying to find the hospital, then waiting to talk with the doctor, trying to figure out just what's going on to get some type of explanation. And to this day, we still as a family remember one of the residents who took time to go through everything that was on with my sister at the time. Her kindness, her patience, her attentiveness left an indelible imprint on my family to this very day. And it's that experience that made me relinquish my basketball dreams, all 5'3" of me, and one that serves as a constant reminder that that those few minutes that you take to walk a family through imaging, to explain a hospital course without medical jargon, to hear them out when they're frustrated, to commiserate with them, or to offer a positive spin wherever you can, makes all the difference and really is at the heart of our calling. So I was blessed to have a mother who is the personification of positivity and aspired to rise above her circumstances. We had little means in Trinidad and Tobago, and she moved us to Canada with a full scholarship to obtain her doctorate in organic chemistry. And she supported our family on a student salary in Canada as she pursued this degree, while honestly establishing an unshakable foundation whose extent I've only now grown to appreciate. Like, frequent household phrases I realize now are likely well-known quotes attributable to others were actively lived by my mother. She was a calming presence who always found purpose, even in the worst of circumstances, who woke up at 3, drank coffee like water to cook breakfast and dinner for us, to take us to school, help us through homework while going into lab at all times possible. I realize now what a challenge that was to do without compromising, making us feel cared for, feel loved, and most importantly, feel pushed to improve. She was a reminder, and always is, to try to find the good in everything, and served as a lifeboat for me through the rough times. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's the sooner that you can cultivate a positive attitude, the happier you'll be, regardless of the curveballs thrown throughout your residency. In a similar vein, every single person you come across has something they can teach you. We owe an immense debt of gratitude to our attendings in their willingness to share their patients with us. My gratitude to them is more than I can express, or I can find the words to express. Make sure to observe them in the OR. Efficiency lies not in quick, but in meticulously edited, purposeful movement, which only comes from the experiences of the giants from which we're learning currently. Take advantage of seeing how they handle complications and how they handle difficult anatomy. The first 3 moves that they make to make things easier when they take over a case. Review both your and their operative video in order to see which movements worked, which didn't, which led to complications, which led to more difficult resection, which made everything easier. And also observe them outside of the OR. Absorb how they talk to patients, how they counsel them, consent them, sit with them when things go wrong. There's value in every single interaction to help you become the surgeon you ultimately aspire to be. So try not to waste a moment, since over 7 years, the days are long, but the years are short. And colleagues and comrades are mentors too. They may not contribute to developing your operative skill set in the same way, but they afford the opportunity to develop as a person, and thus as a physician and surgeon. I've learned so much about camaraderie, leadership, finding my own voice, and how to navigate the hospital system, the best accents and phrases to mimic our most loved attendings. They've served as a conduit. You've served as a conduit to inject humor into the day-to-day. So value your colleagues. Look for all the lessons that they can offer, good and bad, whether it's how to act or how not to act. NPs, PAs, scrubs, techs, they're not just their titles, but also people with aspirations, with beliefs, and at their core, a desire to help, whether or not the perception of what constitutes help aligns with yours. And our patients, they have so much to teach us, not only by entrusting us with their body, but also by virtue of the fact that they know and understand their reality better than we do. So just listen as intently as you can throughout your 7 years to try and learn as much as you can. So constant evolution through this residency makes it such that you may become a fluid concept that's sculpted by lessons from each element of critique or praise that are really only anchored by your core values. Try not to lose sight of your unique interests, and continue to pursue them throughout residency to their fullest extent. They may very well define your impacts in the field.
Do you want to start with last?
For me,
Thank you.
global health
Going home?
become part of my
Anybody who's not muted, please mute themselves.
Grateful I am that we live and practice where we do, but we're also heartening in that they brought to light the extent of and wealth of knowledge collaborations. In my travels, no matter the location, it seems surgeons have the same laments, whether they be frustrations with intraoperative pathology, heat about various vascular interventions. In the end, were more alike than dissimilar from what my experiences have been. So if nothing else, just please try to remember not to lose touch with your humanity during this process, and that the pursuit of excellence in our field means taking care of the whole patient, their family, and each other, in addition to technical mastery. So I just wanted to go through in terms of more practical pieces of advice for each of the years. For the R1s out there, ask questions. You don't know what you don't know. And the more you ask questions, I realize in retrospect, the more engaged you are, the more enthusiastic you are, the better. And you are just going to be miles ahead of the game. The more you study and the more you look for things that you don't know. Remember that no one is born knowing neurosurgery. I mean, aside from our attendings, who seem to have some innate knack given their talents. But I just want you to know that we were all there. We all started somewhere. So you can get through it. You can get through this year. R2s, just get comfortable with uncertainty. Those who are ending already know. Try to think 1 or 2 levels above, and try and imagine that you are the only person in the hospital. What would you do for the patient? This is your opportunity to develop your plans, to test your plans, to have oversight and feedback about how your clinical decision-making kind of matches up to the literature, and use your chiefs to learn as much as you can. For the R3s, sometimes you can be the most dangerous person in the hospital because you've already gained the exposure after having done several nights on call, probably feel like you rule the hospital a little bit. But this is kind of where those zebras start to creep up. Make sure that you're still paying attention to details. Make sure that you're taking care of your juniors, and just continue to be an integral part of the team. But again, just look into trying to know what you don't know. As an R4, it's kind of your opportunity to start solidifying, shaping your career. Really observe, now that you're in that mid-level and kind of protected on both ends, what is it that makes a good junior? What makes a good chief? What type of chief do you want to be or aspire to be? And find mentors and role models that help you to accomplish that. Take care of your juniors and try not to perpetuate treatment that's not been beneficial for you. You know, pass on the good and let the bad stop with you. For R5s, make sure that you look out for your team still. Continue to take care of the details, but you can step back and kind of see the forest through the trees. Read as much as you can. It's your opportunity and on your research year to consolidate things a little bit better now that you can sleep. And for your research, make sure you have some backup papers planned just in case your initial plans don't pan out. And as a chief, it's, again, just observing, listening, absorbing as much as you can. Look at the first 3 things that attendings do when they come into the operating room to make the procedure that much easier. Take at least 3 things from every procedure that can make you better, even the smaller ones, even the shunts, even the burr holes, the cranioplasties, like the things that usually we have some of our mid-levels doing. There's always something to learn from every procedure that's going to make you technically better. And just take care of each other, you know, make sure that people are still pursuing their interests that are related to this profession, that your team is supported, and take care of your OR team with the same attentiveness as you do your patients. And above all, like from the boss, our platinum rule of treating others the way that they would like to be treated. And I just make sure that you remember, you know, people may not remember what you did. People may not remember what you said, but people will always remember how you made them feel. And that's reflected not only in our patients, but in our colleagues. So I hope that that wasn't necessarily too preachy, but it does kind of speak to some of the core values that I've tried to maintain throughout residency. And for the specific details, I do have like books and reading lists and operative notes from working with different attendings. So please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like all that information.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So Ariana, that is so you in so many ways. And I want everybody to know, not only did you do you speak from the heart, and it was fascinating to find out about your background. One of the sad things that I see about these talks is many of us find out little secrets about families that make people who they are only at these talks. I wish I knew some of this stuff 7 years ago. And of course, you've published over 20 peer-reviewed publications, and you've been productive in your work in Southeast Asia with global health. And I think you're going to be incredibly successful. So there's no question in my mind you will be after your once you finish your fellowship and go on to be faculty. You'll be great faculty somewhere. Ariana, thank you for brightening up all our days for the last 7 years. All right.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful talk. So without further ado, Samuel Emerson, MD, PhD, comes from a academic family who he went to the University of Southern California, where he majored in biomedical engineering, and I believe water polo was his second major, or swimming. I knew he was he was a monster in the water, I've been told. And he went on to come to the University of Washington, where he got his PhD in neurobiology. Doing his thesis was on neurostem cell progenitor cells in chronic cervical spinal cord injury. He was working with Phil Horner, and he came to us through that route. We recruited him when he was in the lab, and he was fabulous. He's been with us probably longer than almost any resident, because he was around when he was doing his PhD, and he did a spectacular job, like all three of these residents that are speaking today, all very, very different in their own way. I'm very proud that he went on to be married by one of our residents, but married Gracie, one of our neuro ICU nurses. And Sammy's gone off to my alma mater in Boston to do his skull base fellowship. And the people in Boston are very excited because they're getting a good surgeon and a good scientist, and he's gonna be a superstar. I see great things for Sammy. So tell us a little bit about what you learned.
All right, thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity today. I'll try to keep this relatively succinct. So what I'm going to talk about for the next little bit here is kind of a summary of 7 observations and lessons that I've kind of accrued over the last 7 years. I'm sure the faculty will be dismayed to learn that I only learned one thing per year, but I had a high school basketball coach who told me I wasn't very bright, and that's okay. It wasn't my fault. So I don't really feel that bad about it. The things I'm going to talk about are not necessarily things that I do perfectly, but things I focus on and try to improve, and will continue to, I'm sure, in perpetuity. And hopefully it'll be an opportunity for some of the younger residents and things to learn some things from my own experience, which kind of brings me to the first point. And I know everybody's rolling their eyes at seeing a neurosurgeon who's spewing Latin phrases and like some attempt to appear educated and things like that. But I can assure you that this doesn't come from like some deep dive into the classics or the Western canon or whatever, where I get this phrase from is actually the 1990s movie Tombstone, which is centered largely around the shootout at the OK Corral, and it's a bunch of guys with mustaches shooting guns and all that stuff. So it's very entertaining to the male testosterone-driven people. And there's one scene where Doc Holliday and another guy are kind of basically talking trash to each other in Latin phrases, and I looked it up at one time, and this was one of them. And basically, what it means is experience is the teacher of fools, and I always liked that, and it stuck with me. And the point of it was basically that foolish people only learn from their own experience, and not from forethought or from the experiences of others. And I think that's people have a natural tendency sometimes to dismiss other people's advice, or you want to find out for yourself. And your attending tells you one thing, and you're like, yeah, they say that, but is it really a bad idea to stick my clues in the fissure? Yeah, yes, it is. And I think you need to kind of remind yourself that basically by being exposed to and having constant access to a wide breadth of neurosurgical experience and decades of expertise, you were able to kind of vicariously live through them. And they've been up and down this road a million times and can show you where the potholes are. And we all kind of know that, like, ask me how I know is almost like a mantra of this program. You hear it all the time from your senior residents, from your attendings, all the things up and down. And I think it's something that's well heeded. I would just caution people that, if you do hear that from an attending, maybe don't take it literally. I know there's a certain mid-level resident who Dr. Kim said, ask me how I know. And he paused and actually said, how do you know? And I think it's a minor miracle that resident escaped the operating room with all of his body parts intact. But the point again is that you have a vast breadth and depth of neurosurgical knowledge around you, and you should listen to it and use that to your advantage as much as you can, because they can help you avoid some mistakes that they've either seen or made themselves. Which brings you kind of to point two, at the same time as you can learn from others, you have to not be afraid to make your own mistakes. This doesn't mean that you can necessarily be cavalier about it. And obviously we try like hell every day to be perfect and to be mistake-free, but you also have to know that no matter what, sometimes they're going to happen. And for us, it's a little bit different, because, the mistakes that we make can be catastrophic and have devastating consequences. And, we have to take them, I think, a little more seriously than the average person. But, you have to know that they're going to happen, and you have to face your fear of that happening. And if they do, you own it, and hopefully at least learn it from them so that they're not made in vain. I think this was something that I struggled with, early on in my residency, because, I think a lot of us come through, we do great in school, we probably do great in medical school, we match into a prestigious program, you get a bunch of smoke blown, and you think you're great. And then you get to a point where, you start residency and you don't know anything, you don't know how to do anything. And, I think I, like a lot of times, would avoid the OR to not face those fears and looking stupid and things like that. And I think that honestly cost me a lot in my early surgical training, and it's something I've had to catch up on since then. And I think most of the, residents and juniors today are much better about that. But I think the point is you can't let the fear of failure hold you back, because it's the only way you're gonna grow and learn. And brings me to point 3 is, when those failures and mistakes do happen, like you have to be honest with yourself, because there are a really good intrinsic system of checks and balances in your training. Anytime you get to that point, like Ariana was talking about, where you feel like you're kind of top of the world and have it all mastered, the neurosurgical universe will have a way of kind of sneaking up on you and smacking you back down and not so fast. And I think it's important that when you look in the mirror, you kind of be honest with yourself and put your ego aside, and instead of pointing fingers or making excuses, if you screwed up, you screwed up, and people will honestly, I think, respect you more for it. If you're able to say, yeah, that one's on me. Which brings me kind of to some thoughts on overall leadership and setting the tone for the people around you, because whether you're naturally inclined that way or not, like you're in a neurosurgical position of leadership very early on. Even as the intern, when you're seeing consults or rounding on patients, people are looking to you for what to do, as you're there too, setting up and starting to run ORs all the way to chiefs, managing juniors. It goes on and on as you kind of move up the ranks. you have to think more and more about how you set examples and lead for others. And I think, one of the key principles I've learned from that has been, really set from the top by Dr. Ellenbogen as, our best damn intern, and that he really does kind of everything he asks of those he commands, and, is obviously not above any task, whether it's consenting a patient or doing any menial thing that you might think you're above. He does them. And I think I've taken a lot from that in order to be a good leader, you kind of have to be willing to be down there in the trenches with everybody else and not distance yourself that way. I also think in a similar vein, like, to convey authority, you kind of have to transcend any petty anger, because again, you really set the tone for everything. And being a, constantly angry, shouting, yelling person all the time, really that just becomes noise for a lot of the people around you, and people don't notice it much. And I think it loses the impact of its meaning. As one of the former chief residents from long ago said, there's nothing really more intimidating than icy composure, and keeping your cool and being nice up until it's time to not be nice really seems like a more effective strategy. The other thing to learn is, like, as you kind of come up and you have, people working under you and with you, you have to remember that they're really listening, and they're listening to what you say and watching what you do, and are looking after you, and are going to like model themselves after you, and you have to kind of take that seriously. And since I tend to be kind of a sarcastic and cynical person, I sometimes say things I don't mean, or tend to make jokes that don't always get interpreted correctly as humor. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of like really great junior residents and things like that who listen and follow orders and do things like that. And I think you have to take some responsibility for that you have an impact on their training, and they're largely going to do what they say and do what you say and believe what you say. I remember somewhat shamefully convincing a junior resident that the way to put a patient who had bilateral hemicranies into cervical traction was to tie a rope around the strip of bone over the sagittal suture, like a bucket handle, and hang the weights off of that. And when I could tell that they were starting to believe me, I felt a little bit guilty, and like maybe I was abusing my position. So know that people are going to be looking to you for how to do things, and again, modeling themselves after you. I think, as Ariana alluded to, the big picture is something you always have to keep in mind. Obviously, we stress detail orientation all the time, and it's for good reason. But it's easy to get lost in those and lose sight of the purpose of things. I think this really comes into play, obviously, in the operating room. And I think in some ways you have to work backwards from first principles and think about, okay, what are the goals of the operation? We're trying to take the tumor out while preserving facial nerve function. We're trying to clip reconstruct this vessel. We're trying to do, but while preserving a perforator, things like that. And then go, okay, well, take a step back. How am I going to do that? What do I need to see? What sort of dissection do I need to have? What bone do I need to remove? And then work back. And then I think that really like imparts a greater sense of meaning and purpose into all those little steps that you do. When I started out as a junior resident, I looked at my like notes on how to do cases from intern year and R2 year. And it's basically just a sequence of like instruments and sutures used. It's like, oh, Kerrison 2, a 2O vicryl, like things like that. And like no real like, you can see, even look at it, there's no real understanding of like what's actually going on in the case. And that, evolved over time as you kind of deepened the understanding. And that will just make you like, obviously not only a better surgeon, but better able to adapt to things that surprise you if you kind of really hang all those, tactics and strategies around a framework of like, what is the bigger goal of either your surgery. And this can obviously be applied to, anything else you do, and service and things like that. Speaking of bringing meaning and purpose to things, I now am going to get pretty pretentious and dive into some Greek mythology and perhaps even worse, some French philosophy as well. As a lot of you know, I have a tattoo of Sisyphus on my arm and a quote from this essay by Camus about the myth of Sisyphus. I'll give you a brief version of it. There's a few different variations on it, but basically Sisyphus was this ancient Greek king who cheated the god of death a couple times. One time he like tricked him and got him into chains so that nobody could die for a while. And another time Sisyphus himself died, but he was able to escape the underworld. And as part of his like punishment for, you know, basically being, having so much hubris to think that he could do this and things like that, he was condemned to eternally push this boulder up a hill to only have it roll back down again, and then start over each and every day for eternity. And like, you know, obviously this seems like an incredibly depressing, maddening fate that, you know, really the only way you can escape from is death. And Camus really thought about this kind of deeply, far more than I could, but he sees him as kind of a hero who like lives life to the fullest and is condemned to an eternal task, but never stops trying. And he really thinks a lot about what Sisyphus' mindset must be as he walks back down that hill each time, knowing that he's got to start all over again and that there's really no end in sight. And, you know, the key to this is that while it seems like kind of a tragic moment, that walk back down the hill, but that if you just even acknowledge that truth and conquer it, it kind of leads to this state of contented acceptance. And he writes that, you know, one must imagine Sisyphus happy and that the struggle itself to the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. And I know that, you know, like not everybody will find that relatable, but I think that people can, you know, definitely identify with that sense of having to start all over again or being engaged in something that seems like it has no end or repetitive, and especially in residency. And my takeaway from it is just that the key is that, you know, there's no tragedy in starting again as long as you start again, and that you kind of make your world and your experience through those actions and interactions. And that's something that you can control, even on the smallest of scales. So I think for my last point, I realized I can't talk about walking up a mountain for a really long people of time without bringing up Dr. Kim's annual hike to the heavens. And, you know, this will obviously make most sense for those of you who have actually been on it a few times. But it kind of struck me as I was thinking about it that it's really like a good metaphor for neurosurgery residency in general. It's long, it's difficult, you have to do it on very little sleep. At many points, you kind of wonder what the heck you were thinking. And but it pays off with some really incredible sights and experiences that, you know, you really couldn't get without all the pain invested. And I really think about different sections of it as kind of the different years of residency. Like you start off full of optimism and feeling like you have this going, and, you know, it's uphill from the get-go, but you feel like, okay, it's, you know, I can do this. And then very quickly you realize like, man, this never stops, and kind of feel like you got more than you bargained for. And then you get up to the kind of first break point where you get your first views and you have lunch, and that's kind of like the end of our 2 year where you start to feel like you accomplished something and things have paid off, and you're kind of like, okay, I've made it. But then you kind of realize that you can't quite take your foot off the gas just yet, because there's more climbing to do. And you got another hour or two before you get up to the main ridge where the big views happen and all the great scenery. But then you're up on this ledge for you know, a good long hour or so, where, you know, the sun's out now and there's total exposure, and, you know, you kind of feel like you're in this never-ending state of you know, really just like kind of heat and pain and feel like it's never going to end. And if that isn't a metaphor for children's, I don't know what is. But then eventually you start coming back down the hill and get down to the lake and get some refreshing. That's kind of like our 5 year. You kind of get your energy back, you get your wind back, you know, get a little second boost of energy. And then the last mile or two, you know, kind of the cheap year, and you kind of know you can handle it and that there's an end in sight. And the payoff at the end is, as Dr. Kim says, you know, the best beer you've ever had in your life. So, you know, I think that it really encapsulates it well. And for those of you who haven't done it yet, I really think it's worth the time. And hopefully, you know, I get to come back sometime and do it again. I've been kind of sprinkling throughout this talk a bunch of, you know, my favorite photos of the Seattle area and you know, some of the meaningful sites that I've seen. And I just have one more photo to share, and it's probably the most important one.
Words can't say enough for that one. We congratulate.
Yeah, so sorry, but yeah, this little one's going to be joining us in the fall in Boston, and I look forward to introducing you all to them down the road. Thank you.
Sammy, that was beautiful. I hope Gracie is here watching this, and lots of wisdom on that one as well. Just interject one thing. All three of these residents have not only have they performed superbly clinically, have big hearts, and have been wonderful to their patients, but they've also published and been academically superior. So without ado, only by the nature of the fact that his name begins with Ruzevick, he's last, but it never bothers him at all. By way of introduction, I can tell you where I was when I talked to Jake to convince him to come to the University of Washington. Like the previous two residents, he had a lot of choices. He was the valedictorian of Coronado High School. He grew up in La La Land. I mean, Coronado. I mean, what a beautiful place Mr. and Mrs. Ruzevick found to raise a child. I don't know why you would ever leave that place. He went on, his lineage is as impressive as anybody's. He went on to get an MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology degree. And then he was recruited to Johns Hopkins, where he got his medical degree. He always has, he's a workhorse. He published over 30 publications. There are lots of Jake stories, and we share a lot of interests in common, including a golden retriever who has accompanied him through the last 3 years of his residency. Important. And of course, his parents are, as in the previous two, are hugely important in his life, as are Sam's parents and Ariana's. So Jake, without further ado, tell us about greatness.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Ellenbogen. I had a lot of fun making this talk. You know, these Grand Rounds talks were always the highlight of the year for me. And so seeing everyone from Sean McAvoy to Dr. Oxford to Dr. Bono give these talks, it was really a time for reflection and also at times some whimsical exploration of old photos. So I hope everyone enjoys it. But to everyone here this morning, good morning. I'll be talking about greatness. What is it? Who has it? And why I think we can all achieve it. In my own head, I differentiate an expert versus someone who is one of the greats. An expert is someone with comprehensive and authoritative knowledge of a subject, while greatness is the application of one's expertise during moments of uncertainty or of high risk, with more favorable outcomes than not. And when I think of greatness, I think there's probably some overlap here with a lot of folks on the call. But these are the folks I think of. I think of Tiger with his 82 tournaments and 15 major victories. I think of Rafael Nadal, the king of clay. And of course, Michael Jordan and Tom Brady, although I do know it was a risk putting Tom Brady on the slides here, although I know there are some secret Patriot fans on the call. And my inspiration for this talk came from trying to make sense of how these greats came to be. And these two books seem to spell it out pretty well, and I thought were especially applicable to all of us here trying to become a great neurosurgeon. If you haven't read them, I know they've been New York Times bestsellers, but I really recommend it. They break down greatness and how greatness is made but not born. And on that topic, I'll break my talk into 3 segments, which I thought correlated really well with the themes of these books. The first is that I think we were all supported enthusiastically by our families throughout our developing years. All of the residents and all of the faculty practiced intensively. And finally, and probably the most important, is that we studied with devoted teachers. And so with that in mind, my goal for today is really just to say thank you to my team. because contrary to what you might believe, listening to your own rear end with a stethoscope or eating grass at the driving range doesn't seem like the best predictor of working in a teamwork-driven, high-stress environment. And really, at the end of the day, all I could think about was, aren't I lucky? Like you said, I was born and raised in San Diego, California. If you scroll over to Betty and Jim Ruzevick on the call, you'll see palm trees, blue sky, and a golf course behind them. And that's what life was like there. I was very lucky. I grew up playing outside from dusk till dawn. There was golf, tennis, running, soccer, and of course, the best waves in California. I left that sunshine behind to head to the East Coast, where many of us spent some time. I moved on to MIT, where it was very apparent I was studying with some of the smartest students in the world. Proof that I may not have been cream of the crop, though, came during my third year when I was at a Bruce Springsteen concert at the Garden, and I got a call from a Baltimore area code. I picked up, and it was so loud, I told whoever it was on the other end to call back tomorrow. Thankfully, they did, and it was the admissions committee at Johns Hopkins awarding me a spot in their incoming class. So I'm eternally grateful for that call back. And then in 2014, it was probably one of the best moments of my life. I matched at the University of Washington for a neurosurgery residency. And I too remember that call from Dr. Ellenbogen. He was at a hunting lodge. God knows what he had just shot, but I remember hearing his voice and just being so happy, knowing that the next 7 years I would be able to study under him and all the faculty here. And so I think for most, that would probably be enough. It was a really good journey up until I was 26 years old, but I hope you'll all see through these slides and through my thanking of everyone here, that the lessons I learned, the people I met, and the training I received made for the best 7 years of my life. So my story starts with my parents, Betty and Jim, and they're on the call, like I said, and so they know, they really, and everyone knows that they really set the bar for parenting. They were strict, but not controlling. They were passionate, but they were not the kind that got kicked off the soccer field. And most importantly, they were always on my team. And so to them, I want to say thank you for being my North Star. There have been times where the night was dark and I was lost at sea, but I always knew I could look back or look up to you both to find my way. So thank you. And one thing I'm incredibly thankful for is the support I've always received from my family. There's pictures here of grandparents, mom, dad, from when I was smaller than the size of a putter. But we were a small family, but a strong one. And I felt like my own team, or I felt like I had my own team where everyone had the same goal. And that was to give me the experiences to grow and build a foundation for whatever it was I chose in life, whether it was to be a neurosurgeon or an artist. They would have supported either equally as emphatically. And I'd be wrong to say if that growth ended with my epiphyseal plates fusing. In 2019, I met a beautiful realtor named Heather. She's actually sitting right next to me here. From our first date at Momiji, just down the road, there was instant chemistry, which developed into a deep love. And I remember on our first date, she warned me that sometimes she would get called away to open houses or have to step away from the dinner table to take client calls. And that had caused strife in previous relationships. And I responded with, sometimes when I'm on weekend spine call with Feng Yi, never mind, because I wanted a second date. And so she learned what was at the end of that statement. But over the next 2 years, she endured the stress and crazy hours of chief residency with nothing but grace, complete understanding, and endless support. And so to Heather, I want to say thank you for setting the bar of what it means to be a devoted partner, and I love you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the remainder of my family, because it's very apparent that each generation gave their children just a little more opportunity than they had. And I'm sure that most of us here, if they did a deep dive, would probably see something pretty similar. Dating back to about when my family started in America, whether it be from Italy or Eastern Europe, They weren't neurosurgeons, but they were coal miners and they were homemakers. Within 2 generations, we had broken into healthcare with 3 nurses, a pharmacist, and the first surgeon that married into the family. And my mom made sure to make me say that it is not just a nurse, but a nurse practitioner. So I wanted to make that clear to everyone. With that foundation, I'm part of the lucky generation of the Ruzevick family. I had a very comfortable life, and I'll be the first to admit that. And I was a spoiled, rotten only child. But I got to focus on the childhood activities that built the foundation to succeed in life. The same can be said for my cousins, who's a surgical resident at the University of Michigan, and then my other cousin, who's a professional soccer player and played in Europe. And of those lessons that I keep speaking of, I'll list a few of them that I thought were especially important and are probably the 3rd time you'll hear them for today, as both Ariana and Sam touched on them, so clearly important. And the first that I think most thankful for is the ability to work as a team. And I learned that starting from a young age. And the furthest I can remember back is part of the locally renowned Coronado Cobras, which you see on the left there. My folks made sure I played year-round sports through high school, even when I had periods of burnout. You know, there's periods of burnout when you're young, and there's periods of burnout when you think you're going to be a private practice spine surgeon. But they kept their support, and they kept me in those sports because they knew it would be good for me. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And I think there's a parallel there with a lot of faculty who put me back on the right track when I was having periods of burnout mid-residency. I don't think the importance of friendship could be understated. Friendship can come in a variety of shapes and sometimes has 4 paws, which you'll see on the right. That is indeed Bovie, who Dr. Ellen Bogan casually mentioned at the very beginning. I'm still looking forward to our play date with our 2 golden retrievers, hopefully before I leave. But finding those who you just click with gave rise to my personality and the importance, also to quote Dr. Ellen Bogan, of treating everyone by the platinum rule. If I can give one piece of advice to the junior residents here, it's remember who your friends are and keep them close. And set goals. Basketball seems to be a pretty common trend for parents of our generation, and mine were no different. So when I was a baby, I think my dad's #1 goal was to make sure I grew up to be a professional basketball player. But unlike Ariana, who topped out at 5'3", I topped out at 5'6", so those hopes were really dashed. And the same to those in becoming a real Olympic athlete in training. But I will say that goal setting is incredibly important when you're faced with the overwhelming knowledge of neurosurgery residency. As an intern, you know, Zach, Malia, and Dom learned to prep and drape a patient, of how to hold an instrument and tie really good knots. To all the mid-levels, learn to be efficient and limit blood loss. Make sure your field is pristine when the attending walks in. Always take a minute to clean up and leave it looking nicer than when you started. And attention to detail should be your mantra. And as newly minted chief residents, remember that the days are long, but the years are short. Be a sponge for everything our teachers say. And remember to take good care of your junior residents. They are the ones who will determine if you sink or swim. When I was a little boy, about to lose my first tooth, my parents offered to, like most parents probably, offered to tie one end of a string to a doorknob and the other to my tooth and then slam the door. I wanted that tooth out, and so I really thought about it. But instead, I went to my neighbor, an ER physician, and I thought that would probably be the better option since, you know, he's a doctor. He came out with a pipe wrench and some pliers, and I was willing to take a risk. And luckily that tooth just fell out on its own. It all just seemed to work out, but I was willing to go through the pain of getting that tooth out. And one of the hardest parts of being a resident is to take a step beyond what you're comfortable with. I think that's a common theme we've heard today. I remember the stress on one of my first days of intern year of getting that arm board just right. I remember thinking 2 weeks prior, I was a hotshot medical student at Johns Hopkins, and now I was being outsmarted by an arm board. But I took the risk of not asking for help and got that arm board connected. And I'll tell you, I was really proud. I didn't tell anyone about it until now, but it was one of my more proud moments of the first couple days of residency. And all of a sudden I had crossed that chasm and was faced with the next challenge of learning how to properly shave an incision. And most will recognize I was not in Dr. Patel's or Dr. Ferreira's case, but you can see how these challenges build on each other. So don't be afraid to take the next step. On the left here, this is one of my favorite pictures of my dad and I. I was a pitcher on another locally renowned baseball team, the Coronado Purple Jets. Now I'm not sure the role of a pitcher on a T-ball team, but clearly my dad wanted me to know what to do should I end up with the ball. Picture shows a hat that's too big for my head and me tossing the ball, listening intently to his guidance. But in real life, as I've learned over the years, it was more like, I know, Dad, stop it, I got it. Now I'm guessing the ball never came to me, but looking back, I know never to decline advice when people are willing to give it, whether that be to throw the ball to first base, be liberal with the application of sunscreen, or that teamwork when doing the dishes at night means you get ice cream faster. And one of the hardest parts about being a resident is forgetting your ego and remembering that there are people that know a whole lot more than you do. But to be honest, we just made the same mistakes our juniors were about to, so we try to ward them off at the pass or prevent them from falling off the cliff blindfolded, like in Sam's talk. Always welcome advice on patient care or surgical technique. You never know when you'll be given a true pearl. And I know there's a few folks on the call who never did a neurosurgery residency, and it should come to no surprise, but I want you to know that it is really hard. I wish I could say that I was always moving forward, growing and learning without any setbacks whatsoever. But know that that's not true. There will be heartache, divorce, cancer diagnoses, deaths in the family, and worldwide pandemics. I've been caught sleeping in the ICU, shown on the left there, to one of my greater embarrassments. And of course, this is on top of daily tragedy of brain tumors, subdural hematomas, car accidents, and gunshot wounds. So to everyone, I know we have our moments, but don't be afraid to take a deep breath and know that it's okay to call a friend or say a prayer. Know that the sun will rise the next morning and that maybe a vaccine is right around the corner. So over the last 34 years, I hope I've shown all of you that I've had the incredible opportunity to experience life in a way that taught me these really valuable lessons. And gosh, 3 weeks ago, I was operating with one of the medical students who I've known for a few years now, a real superstar who's worked in several of the labs and has been around the department forever. And he's getting ready for a sub-I, and he asked me for any advice in applying to neurosurgery residency and becoming a strong resident. And I didn't respond with, well, you'll want to do a craniotomy the way Dr. Silbergeld does it, or get into the endless debate of the infection risks of electrocautery versus sharp dissection to get to the spine for a complex fusion. Instead, I think this picture sums it up pretty well. Becoming a strong resident starts with 10 things that require absolutely no talent whatsoever, but that a lot of us seem to forget from time to time. To the junior residents on the call, please take a screenshot of this. And when you feel like you're falling behind, hit the reset button and try to do these 10 things really well, and you'll find your path again. Over the last 7 years, I can't have imagined a better surgical experience than the one I received here at the University of Washington. Like Sam and Ariana, I performed just over 2,000 cases, the overwhelming majority of which were cranial cases. This is an up-to-date case log, Dr. Ellenbogen, so you can take it to the bank. But over the last 7 years, I did just over 900 cranial cases, 294 pediatric cases, the majority of which with Dr. Lee, 375 spine cases, 350 cases up in the ICU, and 70 peripheral nerve cases, the majority with Dr. Ko, Dr. Gelfenbein, and Dr. Ravenpay over at the VA. And I owe an incredible debt of gratitude to all the faculty on the call here for their trust in allowing me to help take care of their patients. I did the most cases with Dr. Ferreira, about 220 or so, And in the middle of the night, a couple weeks ago, I just did my first case with Dr. Karandikar. I can honestly state that there wasn't a single case that I didn't learn something new or change something about how I operate. And so I hope the junior residents will remember this point. There is no case that is insignificant. And remember that you can't walk until you can crawl. And the same is true in neurosurgery. To that end, I think it's important to show one of my favorite graphs that plots confidence versus wisdom. And I can't remember where I saw this for the first time, but it really resonated with me. And so I implore all residents not to fall victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect. We all do, but just be mindful of when you are. Because I always knew when I reached the peak of Mount Stupid, and trust me, I summited it several times. Remember that a healthy dose of humble pie goes a long way. And no matter how confident you are, there is much, much more to learn. My academic experience here was and continues to be an interesting journey. I came to Seattle thinking I was going to be the next greatest GBM surgeon scientist. Dr. Patel has taken on that role, as has Sam. It wasn't until Dr. Ferreira took me under his wing that I found my niche in skull-based research. I like to break that down into research spanning tumor genomics to clinical outcomes. And I think we did really good work together over the past 7 years. And I really do believe that the best is yet to come. So to give everyone just a quick sense, we explored the genomic mutations underlying skull-based meningiomas and showed that their genomic signature was highly correlated with tumor location, more so than survival. And you'll see that, it's on all these papers, we have multiple residents and we all worked really well together. So you'll see Sam, you'll see Abdullah, Chiba, several other folks over the next few slides. Recently, we published our series on the posterior petrosal approach. It's currently under review, and I know Dr. Shaker has plans for a second manuscript, and I look forward to seeing that in the future. But it is something, even though it was a simple clinical study, it's one that will change the way in which we take care of these patients, because we found that folks with epidermoid cysts had high rates of delayed hydrocephalus. And we now know to closely follow these patients in the outpatient setting, a little more closely than some of the others. And what turned out to be one of the more interesting projects, we further characterized mosaic expression of PDGFR beta mutations that gave rise to fusiform aneurysms. And this has really been in the works for a long time. And there's a number of faculty that were involved in this project. And I hope you'll all be on the lookout in the next few months, because I really do think these are really going to make a splash. And then finally, we looked at our institutional experience of grade 2 and grade 3 meningiomas and found statistically significant results in the utility of adjuvant radiation and better predictors of survival. At the end of the day, all of these projects, I hope, will advance the field of neuro-oncology, and I'm really proud to have been a part of it. I'm handing the baton off to residents like Zach and Malia and anyone else who's interested. And I just know that it's going to be even better from here on out. And at the end of the day, having a supportive family and training intensively got me well on my way and really to the doorsteps of the University of Washington. But it was the ability to be mentored and taught by skilled and devoted teachers, all of which are on the call, I hope, because I think I have a thank you slide to just about everyone. But these devoted teachers made this the best residency program in the country. And in no particular order, but I want to start by saying thank you to Dr. Ferreira and Dr. Kim. And very specifically to these two, I want to say thank you for setting the bar for my performance at perfection. Like Jordan or Tiger from my earlier slides, both of you expect nothing less than technical excellence. And I always knew when I didn't achieve that standard. It was easy to know the come on bosses or please irrigate the brain so it doesn't look like a potato chip always reminded me that there's no time for anything less than my best. One of my favorite documentaries recently, and I think most of us have seen it, was The Last Dance. If you haven't seen it, it's the story of Michael Jordan and what made him great. And it was just that. He expected nothing less than technical excellence from his teammates. And if you gave that, then he was your guy. And this is the best analogy that I can relate to Dr. Ferreira and Dr. Kim. That, and I also hope to someday join the club of those attendings that look really good in sports cars. During my R2 year, I may have left a couple names off this slide, but Ryan Morton, Josh Abacassis, Lynn McGrath, Sam, and I all decided to grow mustaches one November. I don't really remember why, but I do remember running into Dr. Lee one morning before grand rounds, before it was all virtual. And I remember her telling the other guys, we were all there together, and she really singled out everyone else but me, and telling them that they looked like criminals and that they shouldn't be allowed into the hospital for fear that children would see them. And then she turned to me, saw my sad excuse for a mustache, and said, Jake, I can tell you're trying. And so to Dr. Lee, I want to say thank you for always recognizing when the residents are giving their best at whatever it is they're setting their mind to. I will never forget you saving the day at 2 a.m. when I was at Children's and close, possibly summiting the peak of Mount Stupid, thinking that I could get away with telling the OR front desk that my professor was indeed in-house, when in reality, I just needed to get the patient to the OR, and then come to find out that I couldn't get a hold of my professor. And you came in at 2 o'clock in the morning to save the day. Thank you for inviting me for dinner with your family when neither of us had left the hospital for 3 days. And you can tell your husband that, yes, you guys did adopt a third child. You're an incredible mentor and an even better friend. So thank you. To Dr. Silbergeld, I hope you're on the call. Thank you for teaching me the DLS way. The juniors will all admit that just about any cranny we do together at Harborview, at some point, the statement, "This is how Dan does it," will come out. Thank you for your endless bank of knowledge about neuroanatomy, as well as making sure I knew the 5 types of salmon, what the plastic on the end of a shoelace is called, and how many cervical vertebrae a giraffe has. To Dr. Koh, Dr. Patel, and Dr. Levitt, thank you first and foremost to Dr. Koh. Thank you for your patience, not only with me, but every other resident in this program. You are responsible for building the foundation of every resident's surgical skill, and I don't think you get the credit you deserve for that. So thank you for your patience and your trust in all of us. To Dr. Patel and Dr. Levitt, thank you both for being true resident advocates and sitting so patiently in the assistant's chair. I can always tell when you both get a little antsy, more so than the other faculty, but even when you do, you always give me about 10 to 15 more minutes in the primary chair, and for that, I am very grateful. To Dr. Ogeman, Dr. Lozier, Dr. Pekethly, and Dr. Rapport, I had a tough time finding pictures of you guys on the website, so I thought this would do. But to all of you, thank you for your dedication to the field of neurosurgery and mentoring the next generations of surgeons, whether it be in clinic, in our case conferences. I always appreciate your input. And when it comes to that dedication and accomplishment, I don't think it will be possible for us to stand on the shoulders of giants, but know that all of us will certainly try. To Dr. Brow, Dr. Houtman, and Dr. Ogeman, thank you for trusting all the residents and taking care of the most vulnerable patients. I don't think any resident is truly prepared to come and care for sick children or grieving parents on their first go around at Seattle Children's, but we follow your leads and it all seems to work out. And I will admit that working at Seattle Children's was absolutely exhausting and one of the hardest parts of this residency, but in looking back and putting together this talk, I wouldn't have changed a thing. So thank you for that experience. So Dr. Ravenpay and Dr. Gelfenbein, thank you both for instituting a new clinical rotation and rolling with the growing pains. And to Dr. Ravenpay, thank you for leading the WISH lab courses. I can't say enough how helpful they are. And again, I think this is something where you don't get the credit you deserve. So thank you. To Dr. Bono, one of our newest faculty members, thank you for your many years of friendship. Ever since my first day in Seattle, you've been incredibly welcoming, and I thank you for that. You're a model for the type of individual we all hope to be upon graduating from the University of Washington, one with impeccable character, a soon-to-be phenomenal father, and a strong surgeon. I look forward to a lifetime of friendship with you. To Dr. Zhang, Dr. Chestnut, Dr. Saigal, Dr. Hofstetter, Dr. Karandikar, and Dr. Wiseman, enough cannot be said about your dedication to all the residents' education. If Dr. Chestnut's here, I think you have the best understanding of our growth as you see us every morning from day 1 to day 2,555. To be able to successfully mentor a day 1 and a day 2,555th resident takes a special skill, and you do it with ease. To Dr. Zhang, my first day of intern year, I was walking with the group, Dr. Chestnut in tow. I was completely lost and scared. And of course, just my luck, the herniation phone goes off and I just about soil myself. I answer the phone. This is Jake with neurosurgery, not exactly clear on remembering how to say my name at that point. And on the other end of the line, a thick Chinese accent asks, "Who the fuck are you? Put your chief on." From then on, I knew we would be good friends. Guidance. A total of 10,000 pedicle screws must have gone in the last 7 years. And I think it was the residents that placed about 9,999 of them. Thank you for the subtle corrections to make sure we don't skive immediately and teaching all of us the F and Z cuts. I don't think we can think of a TLIF in any other way. And finally, to Dr. Ellenbogen, every year you are faced with ranking the top 3 residents who you think will best add to the culture of UW and grow into future neurosurgical leaders. That is a tall order for you and a tall order for a 26-year-old to understand. And so first and foremost, I want to say thank you for taking that risk with me. One thing that I think goes understated when I think of true greatness is those people who are great leaders. You have proven that time and again to me and all of us here. Thank you for leading a department of dedicated surgeon scientists, for leading and inspiring the residents, and for leading with compassion and the strongest moral compass. And so for my family and I, thank you for all that you've done to help me grow as a person, as a friend, and as a surgeon. And to Sam and Ariana, I couldn't have asked for better co-residents. And it went unstated, but I think we'd all agree that, you know, we didn't spend enough time together as we would have liked. But that doesn't mean that I don't think the world of you both. I always have your back, and I look forward to bragging to the world that 2 leaders in neurosurgery were my co-residents. And to Sam and Grace, congratulations on your new baby. That is incredibly exciting. When I think about greatness, bringing it back to the start of this talk, I don't think about how big one's bank account is or how fancy their car is. I think about the people I want in the primary operating chair when disaster strikes. And I've been there for all of these, whether it be an intraoperative aneurysm rupture, a sinus injury, or God forbid, a carotid injury. I was able to stay calm because I knew my teammate had it completely under control. And I think all of us owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to our families that supported us along this challenging path, the patients for allowing us to rigorously train on what I argue to be the most technically demanding specialty, and our professors for trusting us and teaching us the skills needed to be great. To all the residents here, remember that someday residency comes to an end, and those safeguards are no longer there for you. It's up to you to soak up every minute of these 7 years like a sponge. I think most would agree that our tenure here as a neurosurgery resident were the hardest years of our life, but also the best 7 years of our life. So to all here, thank you for believing in me and guiding me. And I know all of us here have what it takes to be one of the greats, and the best is yet to come. Thank you.